You know there's something they don't tell you when you start seeking. When you first encounter spiritual teaching, when you begin meditating or questioning your thoughts or trying to wake up to some deeper truth they tell you about the peace you'll find, the freedom you'll experience, the joy that awaits. They tell you about enlightenment, awakening, liberation. They make it sound like gain, like acquisition, like you're going to get something you don't currently have, but they don't tell you about the loss. They don't tell you that growing up spiritually feels less like finding something and more like losing everything. That every insight strips something away. That every awakening is also a kind of death. That the path to freedom runs directly through the loss of everything you thought you needed to be okay. And when you start to experience this loss, when you begin to feel things falling away, you think something's gone wrong. You think you're doing it incorrectly. You think maybe you're not cut out for this spiritual work after all, because it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like regression. It doesn't feel like waking up. It feels like everything you built is crumbling. Let me ask you something. Have you noticed that the more you grow spiritually, the less certain you become? That the more you see, the less you know? That the deeper you go, the more complicated everything gets rather than simpler? This is not what you signed up for. You came seeking clarity and you're getting confusion. You came seeking answers and you're getting better questions. You came seeking solid ground and the ground keeps dissolving beneath your feet. This is the loss of certainty, the loss of knowing, the loss of the comfortable narratives that made reality feel manageable and predictable and safe. And this loss feels terrible. It feels like spiritual failure, but it's not. It's actually what growth looks like when it's real. Because here's what spiritual teaching is actually doing, beneath all the pretty words about peace and freedom. It's dismantling you, systematically, piece by piece. It's taking apart everything you thought you were, everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you needed. And this dismantling is not a side effect. It's the whole point. You can't wake up to truth while clinging to lies. You can't become free while maintaining all the structures that imprison you. You can't find yourself while protecting all the false identities you've constructed. So the spiritual path strips these things away. And each stripping feels like loss, like something essential is being taken, like you're being diminished rather than expanded, because you are losing things, real things, things that mattered to you, things that gave your life structure and meaning and purpose. You're losing your beliefs, the comfortable certainties that told you how the world works, what's right and wrong, what matters and what doesn't. You thought these beliefs were truth, but as you grow spiritually, you start to see them as just beliefs, conditional, contextual, adopted from your culture, your family, your experiences. Not truth, just stories. And when you see them as stories, they lose their power. They can't organize your reality anymore. They can't tell you what to do. They can't give you that sense of being right, of knowing, of having figured it out. And this is a loss, a real loss, because those beliefs were doing something for you. They were making chaos feel ordered. They were making uncertainty feel manageable. They were giving you a framework for navigating life. And now that framework is dissolving. You're seeing through it. And on the other side of seeing through it is what? Confusion. Not knowing. Having to figure things out moment by moment without a pre-existing framework to guide you. You're losing your identity. The story of who you are, what you're like, what you're good at, what you struggle with, where you fit in the world, this story was your anchor. It told you how to be, how to act, what to expect from yourself. But spiritual growth shows you that this story is just that, a story, a construction, a narrative you've been telling and retelling until you mistook it for reality. And when you see through the story, when you recognize that you're not actually the character you've been playing, there's a vertiginous moment of then who am I? And the answer that spiritual teaching gives you, you're not anyone, you're pure awareness, you're the universe experiencing itself, doesn't help. Because you still have to live in a world that requires you to be someone. You still have to make decisions, maintain relationships, navigate society. And doing all that without a clear sense of who you are is disorienting. It's loss. The loss of your own familiar sense of self. You're losing your goals, the things you were working toward, the achievements you were seeking, the future you were building. Maybe you were ambitious. Maybe you had plans. Maybe you knew where you were going and what you were trying to accomplish. But spiritual growth has this annoying way of making all that feel hollow, empty, like you're chasing things that don't actually matter. You start to see that you wanted the promotion not because you cared about the work, but because you wanted the status. That you were pursuing the relationship not because you loved the person, but because you didn't want to be alone. That you were accumulating money not because you needed it, but because you were afraid. All the goals that were organizing your life start to look like distractions, like ways of avoiding being present, like substitutes for actually living. And this leaves you goalless, directionless, without the motivation that was driving you forward. People around you are still hustling, still achieving, still building their futures. And you're just here, present, without agenda, and it feels like you've lost your drive, like you've become passive or lazy or unmotivated. But really, you've just lost the illusions that made those goals feel important. You're losing your relationships. Not necessarily physically, though sometimes that happens too, but you're losing the old way of relating, the familiar dynamics, the comfortable patterns. Because as you grow spiritually, you see how much of your relating was based on mutual pretending. You were playing a role, they were playing a role, and you both agreed not to notice. But now you're noticing. You're seeing the performance. You're recognizing the patterns. And you can't participate in them the same way anymore. You can't pretend you don't see what you see. You can't go back to relating unconsciously. So the relationship either transforms, which is painful and difficult and not guaranteed to work, or it fades. Either way, you lose the old familiar connection. And even in relationships that survive, that grow with you, there's still loss. You lose the fantasy of who you thought the other person was. You lose the projection of who you wanted them to be. You see them more clearly, which means you see their limitations, their patterns, their humanity. And this is good. This is real. This is mature love. But it's also loss. The loss of the idealized version. The loss of the dream. You're losing your coping mechanisms. The things you used to do to feel better, to avoid difficult feelings, to escape reality for a while. Maybe you used to drink, shop, eat, work, exercise, watch TV, scroll social media, pursue sex, seek validation. Whatever your particular flavor of escape, spiritual growth makes it less effective because you become more aware. You see what you're doing and why you're doing it. You notice that you reach for the phone when you're anxious, that you pour the drink when you're lonely, that you start shopping when you feel empty. And this awareness doesn't stop you necessarily, but it changes the experience. You can't escape as completely when part of you is watching, noticing, understanding what's happening. So you lose the relief the coping mechanisms used to provide. They stop working as well, and you're left more exposed to the difficult feelings you were trying to escape, more in contact with the anxiety, the loneliness, the emptiness, with nowhere to hide. This is loss. The loss of your reliable ways of making yourself feel better. You're losing your suffering. And this one is strange because you'd think losing suffering would feel like gain. But it doesn't. Not at first. Because your suffering was doing something for you. It was making you special. It was giving you identity. It was explaining why you weren't where you wanted to be. It was justifying your limitations. It was connecting you to others through shared complaint. When you start to see through your suffering, when you begin to recognize how much of it is self-created, how much is story rather than reality, how much is optional, there's a kind of grief. Grief for all the years you spent suffering unnecessarily. Grief for the ways you use suffering to avoid responsibility. Grief for the identity you built around your wounds. And there's also a strange loneliness, because so many of your connections were built on mutual suffering, bonding over shared complaints, comparing wounds. supporting each other in victimhood. When you start to drop the suffering, you lose this form of connection. People don't know how to relate to you anymore. You're not playing the game. You're not suffering in the expected ways. And this isolates you. You're losing your need for meaning. You used to need life to mean something. You needed your experiences to add up to a coherent narrative. You needed your suffering to have purpose. You needed to be here for a reason. You needed it all to matter in some cosmic sense. But spiritual growth has this way of showing you that meaning is something we impose, not something we discover. That life doesn't inherently mean anything, it just is. That you're not here for a special purpose, you're just here. That your experiences don't add up to anything, they're just experiences. And this is devastating, because meaning was what made everything tolerable. The belief that your suffering served a purpose, that your life was part of some larger plan, that it all meant something. Without that meaning, there's just what is, just life happening, just this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment. No grand narrative, no cosmic purpose, just existence. You're losing your spirituality itself. This is the final, cruelest loss. You came to spiritual teaching seeking something, seeking peace, freedom, awakening, truth. You practiced, you studied, you did the work. And now you're starting to see that even the spiritual seeking is just another game, another way of avoiding what is, another story about how you should be different from how you are. You see that meditation is something you do, and doing it is fine, but it's not getting you anywhere. That reading spiritual books is interesting, but you're still just collecting concepts. That going to retreats is pleasant, but you're still you when you get home. That all the spiritual practices and teachings and insights, they're all just more content, more stuff happening, more experiences to grasp at or avoid. And this is the loss of the last refuge, the loss of the thing you thought would save you. The realization that there's nothing to save you because there's nothing wrong, or if there is something wrong, no amount of spiritual practice is going to fix it. You're just here in your life as you are. And all the seeking was just another way of not being here. Let me tell you what this accumulation of losses feels like. It feels like you're being stripped down to nothing, like everything you built is being demolished, like you're losing your mind in the most literal sense. You're losing the mind's structures, the mind's certainties, the mind's ways of organizing reality. And you look around at other people who aren't on this path, who aren't growing spiritually, who are still comfortably embedded in their beliefs and identities and goals and relationships and coping mechanisms and suffering and search for meaning. And they seem fine. They seem happier than you, actually. They're not losing everything. They're just living their lives. And you think, what have I done? Why did I start this? Can I go back? And the answer is no. You can't go back. Because once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. Once you've questioned something, you can't unquestion it. Once you've started waking up, you can't go back to sleep. At least not fully. At least not comfortably. So you're stuck in this in-between place. You've lost the old certainties, but you haven't arrived at any new ones. You've deconstructed the structures, but you haven't built new ones. You've seen through the illusions, but you're still living in the world that's based on them. You've grown up spiritually just enough to lose everything, but not enough to be free. This is the stage nobody warns you about. The stage that's not in the spiritual books, because it doesn't sell. The stage that teachers gloss over because it's messy and painful and doesn't fit the narrative of spiritual progress. The stage where you've lost everything and gained nothing, or at least nothing you can point to, nothing you can hold on to, nothing that feels like compensation for all the loss. But here's what I want you to understand. This stage is not a failure. It's not evidence that you've gone wrong. It's not a detour from the path. This is the path. This loss is the work. This stripping away is the process. Because you can't find what's real while you're clutching the false. You can't discover what you are while you're protecting what you think you are. You can't be free while you're still holding on to all the things that imprison you. The spiritual path is not about gain. It's about loss. It's about seeing through and letting go and releasing and surrendering everything you thought you needed. And this feels terrible, because loss always feels terrible. Even when we're losing things that were harming us, even when we're being freed from prisons we built ourselves. Loss hurts. And spiritual growth involves so much loss that it can feel like dying. And in a sense, it is dying. The death of who you thought you were, the death of the world you thought you lived in, the death of the future you thought you were building, the death of the past you thought defined you, the death of the meaning you thought made it all worthwhile. These are real deaths. They deserve to be grieved. They deserve to be acknowledged as loss, not celebrated as progress. But here's what happens if you can stay with the loss, if you can tolerate the grief, if you can sit in the emptiness that's left when everything falls away. Something starts to emerge. Not a new structure to replace the old one, not new certainties to replace the lost ones, but something else. Something that was always there but was obscured by all the stuff you were clutching. You start to notice that you're okay. Even without the beliefs that told you how to think, even without the identity that told you who to be, even without the goals that told you where to go, even without the relationships that validated your existence, even without the coping mechanisms that protected you from pain, even without the suffering that made you special, even without the meaning that made it all worthwhile, even without the spirituality that promised salvation. You're okay. You're here. You're breathing. You're experiencing. You're alive. And this aliveness doesn't depend on any of the things you lost. It was here before you had them. It remained while you clutched them. It's still here now that they're gone. This is what's discovered in the loss. Not a new thing, but the recognition that you don't need all the things you thought you needed. That you were always okay. That the problem wasn't that you lacked something. The problem was that you thought you lacked something and spent your whole life trying to fill the lack. The beliefs were trying to fill the lack. The identity was trying to fill the lack. The goals were trying to fill the lack. The relationships were trying to fill the lack. The coping mechanisms were trying to fill the lack. The suffering was trying to fill the lack. The meaning was trying to fill the lack. The spirituality was trying to fill the lack. But there is no lack. There never was. You were already whole, already complete, already enough, already okay. The lack was the illusion. And everything you built on top of that illusion, all the structures, all the stories, all the seeking, these were the problem, not the solution. So they had to fall away. They had to be lost. You had to be stripped of them so you could see what's underneath. So you could discover that you don't need them, that you never did, that you're okay without them, that you're more than okay, you're free. But this freedom doesn't look like you thought it would. It doesn't feel like you imagined. You thought freedom would feel expansive, joyful, peaceful. And maybe sometimes it does. But mostly it just feels like being here in your life, as it is, without the constant need to change it or escape it or make it mean something or build something from it. This is the freedom that comes from loss. Not the freedom to have or do or be whatever you want, but the freedom from needing to have or do or be anything in particular. The freedom of not needing your life to be different than it is. The freedom of being okay with what is, including when what is includes difficulty and pain and uncertainty. Let me tell you about the stages of this loss, more specifically, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers, in waves. You lose something, then you think you've stabilized, then you lose something else. First, you lose the surface stuff, the obvious illusions, the beliefs you didn't really believe that deeply anyway, the identities you were trying on rather than living from, the goals that were never really yours. This first layer of loss feels manageable, even liberating. You think, oh, I'm waking up, I'm seeing through things. This is exciting. Then you lose the deeper stuff, the beliefs you really believed, the identities you really lived from, the goals you really cared about. This layer hurts more. This is where you start to feel like something's wrong, like you're losing your way rather than finding it, like the path is taking you backward instead of forward. Then you lose the foundational stuff, the basic assumptions about how life works, the core identities that felt non-negotiable, the fundamental meanings that made existence tolerable. This layer is devastating. This is where you feel like you're losing your mind. like you're falling apart, like you can't function. Then you lose the meta-level stuff, the spiritual framework itself, the idea that waking up is good, the belief that awareness is better than unconsciousness, the hope that this process is leading somewhere. This is the loss of the last refuge, the loss of the thing that was giving the loss meaning. And after that, if you make it through all these layers, there's just what is. No framework, no meaning, no hope, no goal, just this, just now. Just what's actually happening when all the interpretation is stripped away. This is where the path leads. Not to some transcendent state, not to permanent bliss, not to cosmic consciousness, just to this, to reality as it actually is rather than as you've been interpreting it. And reality as it actually is so much simpler than all your interpretations. It's just what's happening right now, in this moment. And what's happening right now is usually pretty ordinary. You're breathing, you're sitting or standing or lying down, you're seeing shapes and colors, you're hearing sounds, you're feeling sensations in your body. There might be thoughts appearing, there might be emotions moving through, but underneath all the interpretation, underneath all the meaning making, it's just this. Just simple, immediate, ordinary experience. This is what remains when everything else is lost. Not nothing, not emptiness in the sense of absence, but this immediate, present, actual experience. And this, it turns out, is enough. It was always enough. You were just too busy building structures on top of it to notice. Let me tell you why growing up spiritually feels specifically like losing everything rather than finding something. It's because what you find isn't a thing. It's not an object. It's not a state. It's not an experience. It's not something you can have or hold or possess. It's what you already are, what you've always been, what's looking through your eyes right now, and you can't find what you already are. You can only lose what you're not. So the whole process is loss. Loss of the false beliefs about what you are. Loss of the mistaken identities. Loss of the illusions that obscured what was already here. The finding happens by itself when the losing is complete. Or more accurately, there is no finding because there was no loss, just the recognition that what you were seeking was what was seeking. But you can't skip to that recognition. You can't just hear those words and suddenly be free. You have to live through the loss. You have to feel the grief. You have to experience the dying of everything you thought you were and everything you thought you needed, because it's the living through it that brings the recognition. It's the actual loss that reveals what can't be lost. This is why the path is painful, why it feels like losing everything, because it is losing everything. Everything that's not you, everything that's constructed, everything that's false. And we're so identified with what's constructed and false that losing it feels like losing ourselves, feels like dying, feels like annihilation. But what's actually being annihilated is the illusion. What's dying is the false self. What's being lost is the prism. And on the other side of this death, this loss, this annihilation, there's life. Not a better life, not a different life. Just this life, seen clearly for the first time, experienced directly without all the filters and interpretations and meanings that were distorting it. And this life, this actual life, this immediate present experiencing, it doesn't need all the stuff you lost. It doesn't require beliefs to be okay. It doesn't depend on identity to exist. It doesn't need goals to be fulfilling. It doesn't demand meaning to be worthwhile. It's just here, happening, being, and being here, happening, being. This is enough. This is the strange paradox. Growing up spiritually feels like losing everything. And you are losing everything. But what you're losing isn't real. And what remains when the unreal falls away, that's what you've been seeking all along. That's what all the spiritual practices were pointing toward. That's what freedom actually is. Not the freedom to have everything, but the freedom of needing nothing, of being okay with what is, of being what you are, of being here, now, alive, present, real. And getting here requires loss, tremendous loss. Everything you thought you were, everything you thought you needed, everything you thought mattered. It all has to go. Not because it's bad or wrong, but because it's not you. It's not real. It's not what you actually are when all the construction is stripped away. So yes, growing up spiritually feels like losing everything, because it is losing everything. Everything that's not you, everything that's in the way, everything that's preventing the recognition of what you already are. And this loss is terrible, painful, disorienting, devastating, but it's also necessary. It's also liberation. It's also the only way home, because you can't get home while carrying all that baggage. You can't be who you are while pretending to be who you're not. You can't be free while clutching all the things that imprison you. So the path strips them away, one by one, layer by layer, until there's nothing left but what can't be lost, what you actually are, what's been here all along. And that, it turns out, is enough, more than enough. Everything you were seeking, everything you needed, everything you are, but you have to lose everything else first to see it. You have to let it all fall away. You have to be willing to have nothing, to be nothing, to need nothing. And then, in that utter poverty, that complete loss, that absolute nakedness, you discover wealth you didn't know existed. Not a wealth you possess, but a wealth you are. Not something you have, but something that has you. Or more accurately, something that is you and everything else. The whole thing. The universe experiencing itself. Awareness being aware. Life living itself. This is what remains when everything is lost. And this is why losing everything is the whole point. Because you're not losing anything real. You're just losing the illusions. And what remains when the illusions are gone is what's always been here, what you always were, what you could never actually lose, because it's what's losing everything. So when you're in the middle of it, when you feel like everything's falling apart, when you're losing your beliefs and your identity and your goals and your relationships and your coping mechanisms and your suffering and your meaning and your spirituality itself, know that this is the path. This is the work. This loss is the liberation you're seeking. It doesn't feel like liberation because liberation is still in the future in your mind. Liberation is something you'll have when you're done losing. But actually, liberation is the losing itself. Freedom is the falling away. Awakening is the recognition that you don't need any of the things you're losing, that you never did, that you were always free and just didn't know it because you were too busy clutching all that stuff. So let it go. Let it fall. Let it die. Everything that's not you, everything that's not real, everything that's in the way, and trust that what remains will be enough, will be you, will be home, will be the freedom you've been seeking through all the spiritual practice and study and striving, because it will be. It is. Right now, underneath everything you're losing, underneath everything you think you need, underneath all the structures and stories and seeking, you're already free. You're already home. You're already what you're looking for. You just have to lose everything else to see it.